Hey divas, welcome to my channel. So the spooky season is very quickly approaching us. Spirit Halloweens are starting to pop up in the abandoned remains of stores that once were. The air is getting chillier and life in general is just getting a little bit better. And so in honor of it being spooky season, I wanted to bring back a series that I started a while back where I discuss who deserved their fate in horror movies. And today I'm going to be starting one of my all-time favorite franchises, which is the Child's Play or Chucky franchise. With the first Child's Play movie being released in 1988, Chucky definitely quickly established himself as a horror icon. I feel like he's definitely a very well-known and recognized character, even if you're not that well versed in the horror genre. I feel like most people at least know who Chucky is, and you see him, you know that he's the killer doll. Chucky is definitely also a character that has terrified a lot of people. Rightfully so. The franchise is one that's just very special to me as well, and I absolutely love how much you can tell that all of the cast and crew loves being a part of it throughout all of the different additions to the franchise. And even if all of the movies weren't the best well received in the media, I love that Don Mancini hasn't been afraid to try new things, and I still think that every addition to the franchise is special in its own way. Through the 7 movies and the 3 seasons of a TV show, Chucky is definitely iconic, and so today I'm going to be covering the first 2 movies in the franchise, Child's Play 1 and Child's Play 2, since I feel like there's not enough material in just one to make a video about it, so I'm kind of going to group 2 together. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Also, as my usual disclaimer for my Did They Deserve It series, this is obviously referring to the characters, not the people who portray them, and also this is by horror movie standards, not real world standards, because let's face it, people in horror movies are very well known for being stupid and kind of in a way bringing on their own deaths. And if you're going to be one of those people sitting there saying, well, no one ever deserves to die, clearly you're at the wrong type of video. So let's get started with the first Child's Play. So Child's Play, released in 1988, was definitely an iconic start to the franchise. The series starts off as Officer Mike Norris is trying to catch the notorious Lakeshore Strangler by the name of Charles Lee Ray and his accomplice Eddie Caputo. However, Charles Lee Ray gets shot by Mike and his accomplice leaves him, so Charles Lee Ray is looking for any means of survival that he can find and ends up going into a toy store. And in the toy store, he desperately searches for any means to survive, which he finds in a good guy doll. Using what was intended to be a voodoo chant, Charles Lee Ray transfers his soul into the good guy doll, so when Mike Norris rushes in and sees Charles' lifeless body laying there, he makes the assumption that he's dead. However, of course, we're not counting that death because we know he's not dead. Then we meet our other main character, birthday boy Andy Barkley, who's excitedly waking his mother up so the birthday festivities can begin. Andy, however, is disappointed to find out that he didn't get a good guy doll, which he's been wanting for a while, but Karen assures him that once she scrapes together the money, she'll get him one. At work, it seems luck might be on Karen's side because her best friend Maggie notifies her that there's a peddler outside who might be selling just the doll that she's looking for, so Karen goes and checks it out, and it is in fact a good guy doll, and she ends up buying him, excited to take him home and surprise Andy. Andy is obviously very excited when he realizes he got a good guy doll and instantly tries him out, and the doll introduces himself as Chucky.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho!
Aaron has to cover a shift at work, so Maggie stays and watches him, and Andy gets some time to bond with his new friend till the end. Maggie, however, is not too fond of Andy's new best friend after somebody sneaks off to watch the 9 o'clock news after it was past somebody's bedtime, and Maggie believes that those two somebodies are the same person, which of course is Andy. Andy obviously insists that it was Chucky, but Maggie doesn't believe him because he's 6, and just chalks it up to be a bit of his childhood fantasy and imagination. After being paranoid, however, though, Maggie kind of searches the house and walks around and ends up being startled by Chucky, who hits her with a good guy's hammer and causes her to fall backwards out of the window. And obviously, Maggie did not deserve her fate. I honestly think the first few kills in movies like this are the saddest because they're the characters who never really even got the chance to believe the truth. Like, obviously, Maggie had no reason to believe that this doll was Charles Lee Ray. Andy's just had the doll for a few hours. Nobody has the chance to see anything happen. So she truly just thought Andy was just playing pretend, and then she lost her life. Rest in peace, Maggie. When Karen gets home from work, she's obviously horrified to find out that her best friend is dead, and she's even more horrified when she finds out that Officer Norris thinks that Andy is somehow responsible for the death of Maggie due to the little flower footprints. Andy, however, notices flour on Chucky's shoes and naturally comes to the conclusion that Chucky is responsible, but when he goes to tell everybody else, obviously they don't believe him. He does try to tell his mother later on as well, but she insists that he's just playing pretend, and so when Andy really realizes that nobody's going to believe him, he kind of just agrees that he's wrong and apologizes. Which, don't get me wrong, I totally understand not believing that the doll is alive, because that's a crazy thing to just ask somebody to believe on the spot like that. But maybe show a little more concern that your son is claiming that the doll is Charles Lee Ray, a serial killer. I digress. What a horrible birthday for Andy Barkley. The next day isn't much better, however, because Chucky convinces Andy to ditch school and go on a little adventure, which ends up taking the two of them to Eddie Caputo's home, or the place where he's hiding out at least. Chucky then kills his former accomplice through a gas explosion. It was definitely a little bit difficult for me to decide if I felt like he deserved his fate or not because I don't know much about him, but in the long run, he was working with Charles Lee Ray. Like, he knew shit was going down, and I'm sure his hands weren't entirely clean either. I think his morals were slightly better than Chucky's, but they definitely weren't great. And as we saw in the Chucky TV series, Eddie started working with Chucky at a very young age and in a way idolized him. He was kind of the catalyst for everything that transpired afterwards. Chucky never would have became a killer doll if it wasn't for Eddie leaving him, so I'm gonna say he deserved his fate. Also, like, you've worked with him, obviously, for several years. You know he's going to be coming for you. If there's any chance of his survival, he's coming for you. Maybe think twice before ditching your accomplice like that, who's a well-known serial killer. Andy is once again blamed for this and is brought to a psychiatric hospital for observation, and Karen takes the doll back home where she makes the discovery that they never put his batteries in him in the first place, so he shouldn't be working.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Chucky holds off for a while, kind of maintaining the doll act, but does give himself up when Karen threatens to throw him into the fireplace, where he then attacks her and makes his escape to go and look for Andy. Karen goes to tell Norris that her son wasn't crazy after all and it was the doll, but of course Norris now believes that she too is crazy, so Karen insists that she's going to go find the peddler who sold her the doll in the first place. Obviously, he didn't know that the doll was possessed, but he doesn't really want to offer up any information, and he tries to assault Karen until Nora shows up and forces him to reveal where he got the doll, which of course was from the toy store where Charles Lee Ray got shot. So now Norris is a little suspicious. He's definitely a little bit skeptical, but an attack from Chucky while he's in the car gets rid of any disbelief he had left remaining. Chucky then goes on to visit a former instructor of his named John to find out what's happening to him, why he's bleeding in a doll body, and how to get out of this doll body. And John breaks the news that if Chucky stays in the good guy doll, he's going to be the good guy doll forever. And he's also not thrilled with the way that Chucky was using the Damballa spells in the first place, insisting that he's just been using them for evil.
An outrage against nature! You perverted everything I've taught you and used it for evil, and you have to be stopped!
Chucky isn't pleased to hear that, so he tortures John with a voodoo doll of himself until John reveals that the only way he can get out of the good guy doll body now is to put his soul into the body of the first person he told his secret to, which is Andy. Karen and Mike find John bleeding to death, and he lives just long enough to tell them to destroy Chucky's heart and then he passes on. Obviously, I don't know much about John, but I'm going to say that he didn't deserve his fate. It was very clear that he wasn't thrilled about the way Chucky was using the powers. He seemed like he was just living life with his practice and obviously never thought that any of this would happen, so he's undeserved. Chucky then shows up at the psychiatric hospital where Andy is being held and ends up killing Andy's doctor with an electroshock therapy device. And on one hand, I tried to be like, well, obviously he didn't know that the doll's possessed. Like, he thinks this 6-year-old is crazy, so, like, you can't blame him for this. But also, was he going to use the electroshock device on Andy? Like, do you think doing that to a 6-year-old is the best way to make him not crazy anymore? I think the morals of that place aren't really all that much better. And when a 6-year-old is crying and claiming his doll might be a serial killer, maybe there's a larger issue at hand that needs help, and maybe you should trust his warnings and you wouldn't have ended up dead.
He's going to kill me! But Chucky is here! Then he's going to kill me!
So I'm gonna say that this was a deserved fate. At least for horror movie logic. Andy ends up running from the place and makes it home, where Chucky finds him and knocks him out and prepares to do his ritual until he's interrupted by Karen and Mike. A fight is sparked, but after being shot and burned, they prevail, even shooting Chucky through the heart. And obviously we know Chucky is coming back, so I'm not counting his death. So for Child's Play 1, that leaves us with 4 deaths, 2 of which didn't deserve their fate, and 2 of which did. I honestly think that Child's Play was a great introduction to the franchise, and it really shows the evil side of Chucky rather than the like low-key iconic and funny Chucky that we get in some of the later movies, but there weren't very many kills, so on we go to Child's Play 2. So Child's Play 2 takes place 2 years later in 1990, and as the movie starts off, we see a little bit inside of PlayPals Corporation, which is the company that manufactures the Good Guy dolls. Right off the bat, we're introduced to the CEO, Sullivan, and his executive, Matson, who are discussing the scandal from several years ago and discussing how they're going to save face for their company. Obviously, the scandal that a 6-year-old claims that their Good Guys doll is a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray isn't the best look, but Matson and Sullivan want to just kind of push out the idea that Andy was just crazy and it has nothing to do with the doll or their company. And so they take the remains of Chucky and plan to restore him and make a fixed doll out of him to prove that it wasn't the doll, which is really stupid to me. Like, obviously I get that they're trying to save face, but it's clear that their morals aren't that high. Like, you could literally just lie about it, whip up a new Good Guy doll real quick and claim that it's the very same one. Like, why go through all that effort when you're clearly not that morally good anyways? It's a very cool sequence seeing how the doll is put together. I just think that they were very stupid to do so. Either way, they fix up the Chucky doll. And as Sullivan and Matson are watching, an assembly line worker gets electrocuted as Chucky is brought back to life. And I am going to say that he did deserve his fate, at least by horror movie standards, because presumably he knew what they were doing. He was well aware that they were taking this doll that had a bad reputation and just restoring it to save face for their company, and he had to know the moral issue of doing that, and he still chose to take part in this anyways. And even if he didn't believe it, he knew the claims, and so I think that that is a big red flag right there. I do get that this is his job and like his higher ups were telling him to, but at the same time, he could have gone to another toy company. He could have done anything else. If you play with fire, you're gonna get burned. And if you mess with something that's been rumored to be haunted or evil, don't be surprised when death catches up with you. So at least for horror movie standards here, I'm going to say that the assembly line worker did deserve it. Sullivan doesn't give a fuck and basically just orders Matson to not let anybody find out about the technician and to get rid of the doll. We then catch up with Andy, who is now 8 years old and in foster care. He naturally has had a hard time finding a foster placement due to the Dolly drama. Joanne and Phil Simpson are a couple who expressed interest in fostering him. At least Joanne expresses interest. Phil is very reluctant about the idea and really only agrees to it because Joanne wants to do so. And Phil is honestly just kind of a dick from the start. Andy goes home with Joanne and Phil and ends up meeting their other foster kid, teenaged Kyle. He ends up getting scared by a good guy doll in the closet, which Joanne promises to remove. And the incident just adds to more skepticism from Phil's part, obviously questioning whether this is really the good idea because he thinks that Andy is just too mentally unstable.
House. It's only a doll. Andy, are you listening to me?
He might have promised to get rid of the good guy doll named Tommy, but another good guy doll is on his way because Mattson, who didn't know what to do with the doll, ended up taking him with him in his car. And while he's off buying vodka for his girlfriend that he's cheating on his wife with, Chucky uses the car phone to call the foster center and figure out Andy's whereabouts. Which, first of all, how was that legal? He literally just called up and is like, hey, I'm related to Andy, with no verification whatsoever, and the foster center's like, yep, here he is. Anyways, when Mattson returns to the car, Chucky threatens him with a water gun and forces him to just kind of drive where he wants, and eventually then suffocates him with a good guy's plastic bag. And I can confidently say that he deserved his fate. Firstly, he's just a dick. He's okay with covering up the death of people at his job just because it would, paint a bad picture of their company. And he was okay with obviously the whole doll thing, like just pretending that didn't exist and, chalking up a 6-year-old's problems to be insanity. So he was cheating on his wife, and so he's just all around a terrible person, and if he hadn't been covering up the technician's death, he would have been able to continue on with his affair. Chucky then finds Phil and Joanne's and he takes over the good guy doll Tommy, and in doing so broke a family heirloom of Joanne's, which obviously upset Phil very much, and since neither Kyle or Andy wanted to admit to doing so, Phil decides that they'll both be punished. Phil does make it clear to Joanne though that he's pretty sure he knows who the responsible party is. Phil also goes on to complain how he thinks Andy is going to be too much trouble, which Andy overhears, and so in an attempt to get on Phil's good side, he ends up playing with Tommy, which obviously ends up being a terrible idea. Chucky ends up revealing himself to Andy later on and tries his chance to take over Andy's body, but is interrupted by Kyle, who helps Andy but also believes that Andy did this to himself. When Phil and Joanne overhear the commotion, they go up to his room, where they instantly blame Kyle despite the fact that Andy insists that it's Chucky. This irritates Phil, who takes the doll and throws him into the basement. The following day, Chucky shows up at Andy's school and gets him a detention after writing profanity all over his paper, and the teacher, Miss Kettlewell, believed that it was Andy. She then locks Andy in the classroom for a moment while she steps away, and when she returns, she finds Andy missing and hears a noise in the closet and assumes that that's where Andy's hiding, so she goes looking for him, instead finding her death when Chucky pops out and stabbing her with an air pump and then beating her with a yardstick. My initial instinct was honestly going to be to say, well, she deserved it, she didn't believe Andy, but analyzing it a little bit further, she really didn't have any reason to believe him because she was just the teacher in this situation. It wasn't someone working at the manufacturer knowing what the doll supposedly did. I mean, maybe she heard rumors, but that's not enough to, prove anything. In her mind, Andy probably just genuinely was a troubled 8-year-old kid. She barely knew him at that, and so she had no obligation to believe him. Was she a little bit of an asshole? Sure. Should she have locked Andy in the classroom? Definitely not. But I'm still going to say that she didn't deserve her fate. When Andy had made his escape, he went home to Phil and Joanne's to try and warn them, but they didn't believe him. And so Andy tries to go and take on Chucky by himself, but ends up getting discovered by Phil, who once again just thinks that Andy is crazy. From there, Phil ends up getting tripped by Chucky while he's on the stairs, and he ends up falling to his own death. And he absolutely deserved his fate. I do understand where a little skepticism comes in believing the story, but he made it very clear that he really didn't care about Andy or his problems from the very beginning. In fact, all he ever did was try and gaslight Andy into believing that he was crazy. He never even tried to tackle the situation with any form of sympathy, where Joanne, at least, you could tell that she did care about Andy and she wanted things to work. Phil very clearly never did, and he just couldn't see Andy as anything other than a problem child. And it gives me some satisfaction in knowing that his last moments were spent realizing that he was wrong.
How's it hanging, Phil?
deserved. Obviously, after this incident, Joanne is devastated and she doesn't want to care for Andy anymore, so he is returned to the foster center. While she's sitting outside, Kyle ends up finding the broken good guys doll, Tommy, and realizes that maybe Andy wasn't wrong, and she decides to go inside and warn Joanne, although it's much too late because Joanne has already been killed by Chucky. And I'm gonna say that she didn't deserve her fate. It was obvious that she actually did care about Andy and genuinely did want to give him a chance, and it was honestly a shame that it didn't work out. Chucky then makes Kyle drive to find Andy at the foster center, where she pulls a fire alarm to evacuate all of the kids. In the manager Grace's office, Chucky ends up stabbing her to take Andy hostage, which once again she didn't deserve her fate. I think she did genuinely wish the best for Andy. Chucky then made Andy take him away, and Kyle ended up following them to the Play Pal factory, where Chucky is unsuccessful in transferring his soul because now he's been a doll for far too long, so he can't. Chucky now just wants some good old-fashioned revenge, and so he terrorizes Andy and Kyle throughout the factory, getting an assembly line worker killed when he stops to fix the machinery and gets the doll eyes put into his. I was also unsure for him because, like the first worker, he does work for a shitty company, but unlike the first worker, I don't know if this guy in particular had any idea what was going on. Like, I'm sure to some degree he had to know what their CEO was doing, but I'm not sure how in the know he is, you know? Like, I don't know if they're literally trying to cover up all this. Like, I don't know if he knows the other technician died and they're covering it up because he's working on a different part than them. And it really is hard to decide this when you barely know the characters at all. And so I'm gonna give this factory technician the benefit of the doubt and say that he didn't deserve his death. I know the logic might be a little weird because I said the first one did and this one didn't, but judging by the time and place, I'm going to say that this one didn't deserve it. From here, Andy and Kyle are able to mutilate Chucky, cover him in molten plastic, and eventually blow him up with an air hose, where Andy and Kyle then flee the factory and head to whatever awaits them afterwards. Once again, though, I'm not counting Chucky's death because we know he's not really dead. This is genuinely one of the best Chucky movies to me of all time because I love how we just cut right to the chase right away. We know that Chucky is no longer a good guy in this movie. He's terrible. He's a killer. And I love how we get to that right away. And the factory sequence is one of my absolute favorites. And I love how we kind of get to see the behind the scenes of how Chucky is made. So in Child's Play 2, we had 7 deaths, 3 of which were deserved and 4 of which were undeserved. For the whole franchise so far, this puts us at 11 deaths, 5 of which were deserved and 6 of which weren't. So at this point, Chucky has caused more undeserved deaths than deserved at this point, showing that he is not yet Chucky the killer doll, but rather a horrible serial killer who's stuck in the doll's body. Which I feel like are different mindsets for him because I feel like once he fully accepted the killer doll role, some of his kills were more so just for fun and not out of vengeance, and some of them were low-key more deserved than others. But right now, he's still just a horrible serial killer. So, of course, this is just my opinion on things. You guys can let me know what you think in the comments if you think some of these were deserved or undeserved. You can let me know your opinions, and you can let me know your opinions on the Chucky franchise. But that is going to be all for this video, and I'll see y'all in my next. Peace out.